In this section, we will explore how Republican state legislators have introduced hundreds of bills that would tighten access to voting around the country, many of them echoing former President Donald Trump's false claims that loose election laws allowed fraud to taint the 2020 White House race. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, as of mid-June 2021, 17 states had passed 28 laws making it harder for constituents to vote. These laws include restrictions on voting by mail, challenges to in-person voting, and limitations on the number of mail ballot drop boxes in precincts. Some of these laws also tweak electoral college and judicial election rules for the benefit of Republicans, clamp down on citizen-led ballot initiatives, and outlaw private donations that provide resources for administering elections. The report notes that this wave of restrictive voting laws is unprecedented since the Jim Crow era and is fueled by racist voter fraud allegations behind the Big Lie. The Big Lie refers to Trump's repeated false claims of a rigged election, which he and his allies used to incite the violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on Jan. 6, 2021. Despite numerous audits and court rulings that confirmed the integrity and accuracy of the 2020 election, Trump and his supporters have refused to accept the results and have continued to spread misinformation and conspiracy theories. Some examples of the new voting laws passed by Republican-led state legislatures are: in Arizona, a law allows the state legislature to revoke the Secretary of State's certification of presidential electors at any time before the inauguration. Another law requires that all ballots cast for primary and general elections be hand-counted by default, a method that election experts say is unreliable and time-consuming. In Georgia, a law imposes new ID requirements for absentee voting, limits the use and availability of drop boxes, gives the state legislature more control over election administration, and makes it a crime to offer food or water to voters waiting in line. In Florida, a law adds more ID requirements for voting by mail, restricts who can collect and return mail ballots, limits where drop boxes can be placed and when they can be accessed, and empowers partisan poll watchers to challenge voter eligibility. In Texas, a bill that failed to pass in the regular session but is expected to be revived in a special session would ban drive-through and 24-hour voting options, add new ID requirements for mail voting, prohibit election officials from sending unsolicited mail ballot applications, and create new criminal penalties for voting errors. These laws have been met with fierce opposition from Democrats, civil rights groups, voting rights advocates, and some corporations who argue that they are designed to suppress the votes of minorities, young people, and other groups that tend to favor Democrats. They have also challenged some of these laws in court, hoping to block their implementation or overturn them altogether. However, their efforts face an uphill battle in the Supreme Court, which has recently upheld 2 Arizona laws that restrict ballot collection and invalidate ballots cast in the wrong precinct. The court's conservative majority also weakened a key provision of the Voting Rights Act that protects minority voters from discrimination. The new voting laws pose a serious threat to American democracy and the right to vote. They undermine the will of the people and the legitimacy of elections. They also reveal how a minority of voters can exert majority control in American politics by manipulating the rules of voting and representation. As long as Republicans continue to embrace Trump's baseless claims of a stolen election, they will likely continue to push for more restrictive voting laws in the future. In 2020, millions of Americans voted by mail or used other policies that helped them exercise their right to vote during the coronavirus pandemic. The result was the highest turnout among American voters in more than a century. But some state lawmakers are trying to roll back these policies and make it harder for people to vote in future elections. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, lawmakers in 47 states have introduced 361 bills that would restrict voting access as of March 24, 2021. That's a 43% increase from the previous month. More than half of these bills would limit mail-in voting, which was used by both Democrats and Republicans in 2020. Some of the bills would require voters to provide an excuse or a photo ID to request or return a mail ballot. Some would reduce the number of drop boxes or the time period for mail voting. Some would ban local officials from sending mail ballot applications or prepaid postage to voters. Some of the states that have introduced the most restrictive bills are Texas, Georgia, and Arizona. These are also states that saw high turnout and close races in 2020. In Texas, lawmakers have introduced 49 bills that would restrict voting access, including 25 that would target mail-in voting. In Georgia, lawmakers have passed a sweeping law that imposes new ID requirements for mail voting, limits drop boxes, and gives the state more power over local election boards. In Arizona, lawmakers have introduced 23 bills that would limit mail-in voting, including one that would require mail ballots to be notarized. These bills are part of a national Republican effort to restrict voting access after former President Donald Trump's defeat and his baseless claims of widespread fraud. Trump and his allies repeatedly attacked mail-in voting as fraudulent, despite a lack of evidence and multiple audits and court rulings that confirmed the integrity of the election. Some Republican officials have also admitted that restricting mail-in voting is a way to suppress Democratic votes. But voting rights advocates and civil rights groups are fighting back against these bills. They argue that these bills would disproportionately affect voters of color, low-income voters, elderly voters, disabled voters, and rural voters who rely on mail-in voting or other policies that make voting easier and safer. They say that these bills are undemocratic and unconstitutional and that they would undermine public trust in elections. Some groups are challenging these bills in court or organizing campaigns to pressure lawmakers to drop them. Some are also calling on Congress to pass federal legislation that would protect and expand voting rights nationwide. The House of Representatives has already passed the For the People Act, which would create national standards for mail-in voting, early voting, voter registration, and more. The bill faces an uncertain fate in the Senate, where it needs 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. The outcome of these battles could have a significant impact on the future of American democracy and the balance of power in 2024 and beyond.